And you're on original sound?
I am. This is original sound.
Yeah, it's good.
That Cedar system has been a game changer for me because I used to I would never do any work, anything other than a quick, here's a sample sitting at my desk, nothing voiceover for actual distribution to a client. And lately I have been, and nobody has pushed back on anything I've done from my desk. So it's been a little bit of a game changer, and I don't know if I'm going to move the voice booth next time.
Yeah, if you can get away with sitting there and more comfortable and all your stuff, great.
Well, I don't need as much. I need a lot of monitors for office hours every day, but I don't need a ton for voiceover. All I need is my main screen, which is usually where I display script, and then the Final Cut voiceover module sits on the left side, which is essentially just the code from Logic wrapped in a different interface that is purpose-built for doing things like punch-ins for voiceover and things like that. And then I can edit it looking to the side. So really a two-monitor system is plenty for doing voice work. Not plenty for doing office hours. I'm surrounded by more monitors than I have any right to look at.
This is America, where you can have my 17th monitor when you pry it from my cold, dead fingers.
I know that. I'm sitting here at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and an iPad, so 6. And then my phone's over here monitoring something else, so that's 7. So I'm a 7-screen daily driver. That's way too many.
There's no such thing. Just like when I hear someone say, when the new TVs come out, say, oh, that's too big. Same thing. No such thing.
Yeah, well, I will say that my prompter monitor is actually reflected. It's through a splitter to a 40-inch monitor above. And there are times when somebody puts up text in something that I'm doing that is so small, I have trouble reading it through the prompter screen, so I have to read it on the big screen.
Yeah, as far as the number of monitors are concerned, I think it falls under more than I need, but fewer than I want.
I think that's a standard, Jason.
Again, I don't really understand the first part of your sentence there. More than I need? Oh, it's not a thing. It's like shelf space. You can always end up using it up.
Nobody ever said, what are we going to do with all this storage?
Right.
You're reminding me, my first hard drive purchased off the shelf, 11 megabytes, a Corvus.
Mine was 20 from AT&T.
There you go. It was the size of a super light block and about as heavy.
I got 122 megabytes of hard drive space with my Apple II CI, and someone was like, what are you going to do with all that storage? Like, why would you get 122 megabytes? And I'm like, because I'm doing audio. I just bought a Pro Tools rig, Pro Tools 1, which
cost what your car did 5 times over. Yeah,
it cost more than the car I was driving at the time. Absolutely, $6,000 if I remember.
I remember to this day building a server with a 5 gig hard drive, and I remember, I'll never forget saying, look, if we fill that up, we have problems.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and digital production. And second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about 5.1 and stereo and not stereo, everything other than stereo, surround. And it's just really an introduction. There was a question about whether we're doing it in 5.1. Not yet, but we are very close to that. So we're going to explain what all these things mean and give some ideas about what we're hoping to do with them in the future. So if you have questions around surround sound, go ahead and throw those in for the second hour. And if you have general questions, throw them in for the first hour. And remember to vote on the questions. It does make a big difference. You're setting up our run of show. You're building that as we go. So your votes do matter. And so definitely jump in there and vote on the questions that are the most important to you and ask questions throughout the hour. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes from Marty Adis here on the panel from Maryland, and he says Sennheiser recently announced a new wireless multi-channel audio system. WMAS is their initialism for it. And he says, what are the panelists' thoughts on this? And he's got a link to investigate.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. You know, right now, every wireless microphone, every in-ear wireless monitor, every comms channel needs to have its own wireless frequency to work on. And there has to be a space in between each of those. And each of those need to be coordinated to work together to avoid intermodulation. It gets very complex. What Sennheiser is proposing to do is to take all of that information, all of those data streams traveling in both directions and put them on one block of RF spectrum, like one channel, right? It's going to be a wide channel, probably it looks like 6 to 8 megahertz wide, which is the equivalent of a single TV channel. So there's some interesting FCC approvals that will need to be made, and maybe they'll need to make some additional space for this. But it looks like it's going to be able to carry 64 channels of audio in one RF carrier in both directions. That's fascinating.
Good, Jeff.
It's actually really fascinating. It's a total different way of looking at wireless. They do say it can coexist with the current narrowband systems, but they don't have more information on their website about that yet. So I'm kind of curious to see how this will work in the short term while we have, the Sennheiser system, but you still have legacy systems that need to coexist within and work in the same show. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a lot more density. So it took me a little time to kind of get my head around it. We were talking about it this morning, and I think that one of the big things is by taking that entire swath and having one whole chunk that it has there, it's able to, much like the DECT system would, allow you to put higher density in. It's going to say, if I have this whole area, you said 64 channels bi-directional?
Yeah, that's what they're suggesting.
Yeah, because normally that would be probably across that about 18 to 20. So that's 3 times the density if it has that whole continuous swath that it's using. So that's a pretty interesting. It's definitely interesting. We'll keep on tracking it. Maybe we can even try to find someone from Sennheiser to come and ask some questions. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think I read through the article as well, and I think it's not only 16 channels or 32 or 64, but it also has comms built into it. So it has more than just the production audio going bi-directional. It has some control stuff as well. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis, Indiana. When conducting sync tests to dial in audio today, is recording the feed via QuickTime sufficient, or do you need to do a monitor or screen record to the far end of Zoom to determine the audio delay needed?
I would definitely check it. QuickTime is probably going to be the best of those two things. The problem with Zoom is, and this is not just Zoom, this is the problem with anything that's WebRTC, is that your video is being sent your video is being sent separately from your audio. And there's a good reason for that. And the reason that happens is because if you get your video and audio together and you start dropping video frames, you'll drop audio frames, and then you'll hear this clicking. And that actually happened in the early days when they were trying to make that all work, but they learned pretty quickly to separate those two things out. And so what that means, though, is that we are constantly dropping frames. In WebRTC, you're dropping frames all the time. And you drop more of them if you're on Wi-Fi, less of them if you're not, but you still drop some here and there. And so what happens is that in anything that's a real time, like a WebRTC style system, you're going to be plus or minus 2 frames all the time. It's just going to keep moving back and forth as it tries to keep it. And for a while, it'll stay right on, and then it'll be a little ahead, and then it'll be a little behind. And so trying to do it off of Zoom is pretty hard. You can get pretty close, but watching the far end of Zoom would be difficult. And we didn't even notice this until we had a what used to be the old, what's called a Validate. And when we watched the Validate and ran it through Hangouts at the time, you just see this big this thing moving back and forth as it tried to kind of manage all of that. Anyway, so I think that the QuickTime is probably going to tell you what it's leaving your computer at. If you're live streaming, what I prefer to do is record on the far end. So I like to record. If I'm streaming to, like, let's say HLS, and sometimes I'll stream to HLS, even if I'm going to go to YouTube later, and I will record those segments, those HLS segments, and then open those in my NLE from Final Cut for me, and then look for I'm doing a slate close or something, and I'm looking for that impulse plus where the slate is when it makes that impulse, and then I correct from there. So that is the way that I try to do it, is try to get it all the way on the other side of the encoder when I'm streaming. We haven't tested it recently with YouTube. For a long time, YouTube was different based on what it looked like live and what it would look like in VOD by about a frame. So you have to be kind of careful of downloading the videos on YouTube. You may be off by a frame. Next question.
Next question comes from Sean Pickering in Loughborough, UK. And Sean says, this is the Freya Tech Pocket 3 cordless detachable 4K camera and gimbal that was offered on Kickstarter yesterday. Has anybody seen, or do they have any ideas about it? It looks like an interesting option to the Insta360 link with the addition of a remote control. And he's got the link there to the Kickstarter for it.
Good, Nigel.
Yeah, so I was looking and studying this. I don't have one, but I was studying it, and that additional handle seems to be the NetAdd. I also think that the camera itself is magnetic, and they show you it driving down the highway. They don't say at what speed, and it stays on there. Might be an expensive way to find out how good the magnet is. I looked at the Kickstarter price for both the camera and the handle. They're offering it for about $300 plus shipping from Hong Kong. They're saying that the commercial price would be closer to $500. So I think if you were looking at that sort of thing. We discussed yesterday gimbals, and I'm thinking of getting a gimbal for my iPhone. I think that may be a cheaper way to deliver a high quality type image.
You go, Marty?
So it is very interesting. But while that is a Kickstarter program and not yet released, there is a very similar product, and I have one here from IdleCam. This is a handheld 3 gimbal camera that works. It's very interesting. It has a touch screen on the back so you can get to the menu systems. And I can show you something much better than that. So it has interchangeable lenses and lights and microphones, and it's all magnetically attached. And so you can get everything from a wide angle lens to a zoom lens. There's even a microscope accessory that you can get with it. That's really interesting. And it has HDMI output. It has remote control, but it's a little funky because the remote control is set up to be used wirelessly as for a drone. And it comes in different packages, and the most expensive package with all the accessories and stuff, it comes with a selfie stick and all that, $600. So it's and it's a 4K camera too. So,
do you know what the chip size is on it? The sensor size?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me see if I can find that.
I couldn't quite find it quickly, but yeah, it looks cool. It looks like a little engineering project there. So it'll be interesting. The FiuTech, I've had some of their products in the past and weren't over the moon about them, but this one looks actually intriguing. And what we're seeing a lot with a lot of these manufacturers is over time they're getting much better. So they start off as something that's relatively inexpensive and cheaply made, and as they keep moving forward, a lot of these companies are making things that are much more refined. So I'm definitely interested in it. It definitely looks. Both of these look like an interesting cameras to play with. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Joshua Minden in Madison, Wisconsin. Good morning. I'm needing a high-quality teleprompter with a dedicated display versus an iPad-driven unit that works with a Canon XA40 camcorder for use in studio and spaces with lots of natural light. It's a single speaker he's looking for the teleprompter for at 6 to 9 feet for the scripted text, and his budget is under $3,000 US. Go
ahead, Marty.
All right. So ICANN has a 19-inch teleprompter that works with any camera, and it's $2,400, and the monitor is 1,000 nits, so that's pretty bright.
I go, Jason.
I'd say the prompter people, 24-inch. I'm not sure if you're going to hit right at 3,000 or a little bit higher for the high bright monitor. The nice part is you get SDI and HDMI, and it's auto reversing, so pretty handy.
Yeah, I've had quite a few of the prompter people at 24-inch, and they've been solid. I have a smaller ICANN, which has worked relatively well. The problem, Marty, is the ICANN 3x4, or is it a 3x4? Is it or is it an actual 16:9 monitor?
Let's see. It says
most of the ICANNs have been.
I think it's a 3x4.
Yeah, and which makes sense if you're. So the main thing you have to decide is what you're using the teleprompter for. The 3x4 works fine if you are reading it. If you're putting text in there, it actually might be advantageous because it does that. If you ever want to use it as what we found with the ICANNs is if you ever want to use them as a Interatron, so you're basically putting a person in there, then the prompter people work a lot better because they're 16:9. If you don't care about that, then the 19-inch ICANN may work great for you. So, but that's what I would think about a little bit there.
So ICANN also has models with a screen below the teleprompter that can be a wide, an HD 16:9 screen,
right,
to put up a second image.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can do a lot of that as well. for all of them, we oftentimes put lots of monitors around them to do that, but we can do that on our own. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis, Indiana. And Jacob says, assuming a semi-treated quiet room, what would you choose between the Shure MV7, the Stellar X2, and the Rode NT1?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I would pick the Stellar X2 for three reasons. Cost, it's the least expensive. Size, so compared to the Rode NT1, they're both condenser microphones, but the Stellar X2 is a little bit physically smaller. So if you're going to use that on screen, that's better. And you don't have the demands of gain that the Shure MV7. I read that as SM7B. I'd still probably take the Stellar X2, but the Shure MV7 does give you the USB output, so you don't have the problems of the Shure SM7B that has low output and needs a lot of gain.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Jeff gave you very good advice, and we're all kind of assuming that you're talking about the kind of thing we're doing here, which is close miking someone in a small room for voiceover kinds of things. If you're doing something different, the options may change. Like if you're doing resume films or something like that, I might go with a different kind of microphone. But for this kind of work, those are great suggestions.
Go ahead, Jeff.
And it does really depend on what you want to do and what you're going to do. And by the way, that Shure comes in both a USB model and a non-traditional XLR model. And that one actually ends up being the least expensive of the bunch. But it's a dynamic microphone. The other two are cardioid. So it really depends what your need is. If you are talking and it's just a podcast or some broadcasting and it's semi-treated, you might fare better with that dynamic mic. If you want more definition, and I always point out, by the way, because I have the Rode NT1 also, it's great. It's really quiet, but it's also sensitive. And there is always the NT1 and NT1A. A significant difference in terms of that brighter high end on the A and the more traditional sound of the NT1. So it really depends on what your needs are.
Yeah, I'm using a Stellar X2 right now, so I use that. The MV7 is something that's what we send out as standard for folks for the Michael Krasny show. So we send out the MV7s automatically. They tend to not pick up a lot of the room. It's a USB, so it's relatively easy to plug in. So as far as ease of use, we find that the MV7 for quality looks really good. And what I will say about the Rode NT1, the new Generation 5, I'm probably going to pick one up in the next week or so just to test. And the main thing that I want to look at there is it's got processing that looks like it's built into the mic. So the software can attach to the mic, and you can change all kinds of things like compression and dynamics and everything else that are inside the mic and via USB. And that's my theory. And it's 32-bit float. So it delivers 32-bit float out of the new, this is the brand new NT1 Generation 5. And so I'm very, very intrigued by what they did there. And so I got to say, if they put an SD card in, I'd be running but not walking. If I could record double end they have so much there in that mic, just having a micro SD card would change it, or even just internal storage that you could pull off that. If what's missing on a mic for us is the ability to easily double end. And so if I could say there's a little button on the mic and I push it, it's got internal recording that's enough for, let's say, 10 hours or something like that. And as soon as I'm done, I can pull it off the USB. That'd be a hot mic. So anyway, that's all. Next question.
Paul Buchan in Columbus, Ohio says, I got an email this morning announcing Dante Studio 2, new features and pricing. Thoughts? And he's got a link there to it.
Go ahead, Marty.
So Dante is starting to incorporate video, a la what NDI has been doing for a long time. And there are a couple of manufacturers that have started manufacturing video products with Dante built in. This seems to be one of the first software products that Dante is releasing or announcing to the public that incorporates video. I don't see a lot of audio changes to this. It seems to just be incorporating video, if I'm reading it right.
I have to admit that this announcement is probably ending my interest in Dante video. So I will say, because it's PC only, which means it'll be a PC first development. And as a Mac user, I just know that it'll never really be good.
OBS on a Mac, it's like forget about it.
It's just, if someone builds something on the PC first, you just immediately, as a Mac user, you just go, well, that's never really going to work. It's always going to be some weird port. They're never going to write to the Mac. They're never going to write to the M1 natively. Like truly, they're going to try to do some kind of crazy in between, and it's always going to be buggy and that works for some things. If you're using Discord or these Electron apps, if you're using Discord or Slack or things, you can make cross-platform things. I'm not saying you can't ever do that. But when it comes to audio and video, if you don't write straight to the hardware, you just end up with lots of little weird problems all the time. So this is probably the death nail for me, that I probably won't look at Dante video ever because of how they're rolling it out. Next question.
Jesse Kester in Glendale says, I think I should get a 10-inch-ish monitor that has horizontal flip for use with my teleprompter. Any recommendations? Or is there a software solution that allows an extended display on a Mac to flip horizontal?
Go ahead, Nigel.
So I can tell you what I did. I got a fairly cheap system from Amazon. I think it's called a WiMAX screen. And then it occurred to me that I needed to flip it, and the next price upgrade on that was quite high. So I put a decimator on it and flipped it around, and I used that as my Interintron. I use that for Zoom. If you're really just going to use it as a teleprompter, there's plenty of software for the Mac that will do all of that for you and flip it around. It's a pity to me that Apple actually doesn't make that a setting in displays that would allow you to flip the screen around, and it would probably save us all a lot of time and money.
There was a piece of software called ScreenX, I believe, that did let you flip it.
ResX, yeah.
ResX. It would let you flip it horizontally and hard set the output and other things like that. But I think that didn't make it to some OS. I think there was some OS where it got left behind. Go ahead, Bill.
Nigel covered it all. I went with one of the Lilliput screens because it's built into that, but they get a little expensive when you get up to 10-inch, and there are better software ways to do it in the decimator. Most of the decimators will do it too.
Yeah, the Lilliputs are what we've used a lot for that, and they definitely, at least the ones we bought years ago, they're about $175 to $225 for a 10-inch. I think, in that range. I think the LilyPut may be moving up into a higher quality, higher price, and away from Feel World, which is, so what you'd want to look at is if Feel World does it. I will say that we were talking about this a little bit before the show. I buy everything now from Amazon. I mean, anything I can possibly buy on Amazon, I buy on Amazon because of the return policy, that I can go to Whole Foods and just hand it to somebody with a QR code and it just goes away. No boxes, no what. Like you just hand it to them, they throw it in some box, and they sell it to people for parts or something. I don't know what happens, but the point is that I've been much more aggressive about it. At first I thought this is going to kill Amazon. They're going to have all these returns, but then I realized, oh, now I don't want to buy anything anywhere else. So just remember that you can buy just a couple of these monitors on Amazon and then just return them to Whole Foods, and pick up some asparagus. Next question.
Mark Renzel in Tumwater says, will today's show actually go out in surround sound?
We're so close. We have had some test feeds going out in 5.1. This one is not going out. Today it's not going out. We're just going to talk about it today. But it is the preparation. This is us stepping up into getting people ready to understand it. And there will be shows in the not too distant future where we're moving things around in 5.1. And at first, you're only going to be able to, one of the reasons we're not really worried about 5.1 yet is that it only works with over the top television. So OTT is, so your Apple TV or your Chromecast and other things like that are the only things that can support the 5.1 at the moment. So we're, as that kind of moves forward, we're doing a lot of things that don't make sense yet, but will as the technology catches up. And we're part of helping that technology catch up. So anyway, so that's what we're working on there. Next question.
Next one comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. Has anyone tried the SE Electronics Neom and USB mic? And if so, thoughts? Thanks.
It looks good. I mean, it looks like a nice little mic, but I haven't, there's so many mics coming out. So a lot of us have. No, we couldn't, I don't think we found anyone that has actually used one. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I haven't. But, one thing I wanted to point out, and similar to what Alex was mentioning before about what the new Rode NT1, if you're looking for a USB mic, I would at least suggest looking at the pre-Sonos Revelator USB mic. What's amazing about it is the software and the DSP. So there's a DSP built in to the mic, and the software mixer is the same software mixer that comes with the separate external USB audio interface. Amazing controls. It installs additional drivers that lets your system think you have additional devices, so you can send separate discrete mixes. You can enable, if you want, what they call a fat channel, which gives you a rack of full EQ, compressor, completely configurable compressor, limiter, a whole. It's just
all
amazing.
Built into the mic.
The DSP is built in, and then that software, runs on the computer.
Now,
that mixer.
This would probably be like the MT1, but can you, or can you set all that and then you just unplug the mic and then it just stays that way? So every time you plug it back in, the mic does it, or does the mic have to be reset every single time it's connected?
It does load it now, and actually, I'm assuming it works the same way as the separate interface. But with the interface, at least, I could tell you that you can have any number of presets in the software that you can save. You can load 2 presets onto the interface. It is stored there. You don't have to be running the computer at that point, and all of your settings for those 2 presets are happening on the DSP, and they're stored there, like an Apollo or something.
But like if you sent the mic, I guess my question is, if I hooked up the mic and I used the configuration and I set it all up, could I then put it in a box and send it to someone without the software and it'll just do the last thing that I had it set to? That's the question. Theoretically, it works in your head. Cool. All right. Now, next question.
Next one comes from Fred Eric Eckert in Bad Herrenalb, Germany. And Fred says, BMD Blackmagic Design uses MADI to get audio into their new switcher. What is the history of MADI?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So MADI is multi-channel audio digital interface. It's basically the multi-channel version of AES EBU. So originally it was 56 channels, and it's been expanded to 64 channels as long as you give up having vary speed, and that's up to 48 kilohertz. If you go to 96 kilohertz, you drop your channel limit in half. And it basically uses the FDDI converted over to copper. It can run over fiber, but typically runs over copper. And so on one coax, you're sending multi-channels of digital audio, and it's clocked with a separate word clock.
Go ahead, Marty.
I can't top the professor here, but it did start out in broadcast and then migrated to live show audio, because it was one of the first very reliable multi-channel audio, not networking, because it's a one-to-one connection between two devices. But I'm not sure whether it's really continuing to be as popular as it was given the advent of networked audio like Dante and such. I'm not surprised that Blackmagic has chosen this, because it's license free.
Yeah. The license free is the key part there. Yeah. So I think that, we always dreamed that someday Blackmagic would support Dante, but there was very little chance, because Blackmagic doesn't really like to pay other people for licensing if they don't have to. So Maddie is a relatively good one. It's used a lot in broadcast because it's simple. So the Dante has a lot more power than Maddie, but the problem with Dante is that you really need someone who understands how to use it. Whereas Maddie is, I'm just going to plug this into here, and what happens is, even though it's point to point, you loop it, so you go in and out and in and out, and it just passes these. You can add some stuff to it, and so people can. But a broadcast engineer doesn't need to know a lot about networking. All they got to do is plug the coaxes into the system, and they can get the audio where it needs to go. And so it's a slightly different. It's a simpler, much more limited, but much simpler process to use. Go ahead, Jeff.
And the fact that it uses coaxial cable and BNC connectors and can go through video patch bays is not lost. The fact that it took over in broadcasting, they understand that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, we can just plug this in and move it through. And it's actually at first I was really frustrated when I had no interaction with Maddie really until the Blackmagic stuff happened, because most of the time with trucks and stuff like that, we would just deliver analog. Like, here's some analog, because I didn't understand Maddie, because I didn't have to do that many channels. And so, but it is a pretty genius format as far as how that works. But a lot of times we have to, and there's some things because of that licensing. So for instance, we have to use an RME to go from Maddie to Dante to get it, or Dante to Maddie to get it into some of our equipment, because the equipment only supports Maddie. And I think a lot of that has to do with licensing. Next question.
Brett Below in Appleton, Wisconsin's up next, and he says, in the pre-show, Alex diagnosed another panelist's audio as being delayed by 8 frames. I could barely tell. Was this determined by a frame rate meter or time code app? Or if Alex just eyeballed the time delay, how can someone learn this sorcery?
Go ahead, Jesse.
It is a skill that you can definitely learn if you work in broadcast media or post-production. And what you do is you watch for B's and P's. So phrases like Bilbo Baggins makes it really easy to see if the audio is in sync with the video. And once you become sensitive to it, anything above 2 frames off will be painful to look at.
Yeah, and in reality, we're all a little off here in Zoom. I mean, that's kind of a constant process there. I would love a feature. We should probably ask our feature for Zoom to have like audio delay in the client would be amazing. So anyway, but I think we're all a little off. When you get used to this, I think that the Malcolm Gladwell thing was like 10,000 hours. I've probably spent a solid 10,000 hours looking at sync. Solid 10,000 hours looking at it, because we sit there in the back. A lot of times when you're at an event, you're supposed to get some time on stage where we can go up and do mic checks. And you're hoping that you get to do them, because otherwise, if the event team does it, they'll come up and do this. They'll do this little weird slapping thing that we let them do that, because if anything goes wrong, it'll be our fault that we didn't do the goofy little clap hand thing, but we don't. It's not useful. It's plus or minus 2 or 3 frames at best. To Jesse's point, watching people's P's and B's, and specifically P's. So we actually have one of our PAs wrote it, but it's just a goofy thing with lots of P's that have it, and someone just goes up there and reads it. And we can sit there and dial it in. Now, a lot of times, though, we don't even have the luxury of using the stage. So we just sit in rehearsals and we dial it in. So that's when you get really good at it, is that you sit there and you're just sitting there and moving the thing and looking and watching it. And a lot of times we guess. We look at it and go, I think it's 4 frames. And you turn it 4 frames and you see if you're right. And so that's, and then you move it and then you look at it again. And a couple of us sit around looking at it because sometimes we have a lot of time. We're done. We're all set up. and we're not getting the stage time we were supposed to because they're rehearsing. So we just use that time to capture our sync tests. And then occasionally we would always go up if we were able to, but we use rehearsals a lot to test that, and your eye gets pretty conscious to what you're looking at. Next question.
Next one comes from Jason Bache in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And Jason says, has anyone found a Raspberry Pi 4 touchscreen with a durable frame and enclosure? For the first time ever, I was not impressed by the stock 7-inch option.
This is a touchscreen.
So the issue isn't the Raspberry Pi, right? I have a ton of these, and the touchscreen is just not. It's not
when
great.
You say stock, who makes a stock?
I'm trying to remember the most common manufacturer.
And are you trying to get one that's all built in? Because the ones that I have bought oftentimes are like literally wires are hanging out of them. They're not.
So what I want is a touchscreen, which is basically bring your own Pi, click it in there, right? And
the ones that I've gotten have been a little. I don't even know if they're around anymore. Yeah,
same, and that's the problem. They're flimsy.
Yeah, I mean, I have. Well, the last one I got was literally it just has it's a 7-inch one, but it doesn't have anything to it. Like you literally had to build something to put it in.
Right.
So that's what I've been getting is because I usually want to build it into a device, and so I don't really want it to be self-contained. So it's just got wires hanging out of it to a control board that goes into the Pi. Next, I don't have an answer. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, I've discovered that you can assign applications on macOS to a specific desktop space from the dock. Is there any way to move an existing window to a desktop space without using the trackpad?
You could use a mouse.
There sure is. You can right-click on it, and I don't want to know if it's something like option, and you can basically assign it to that desktop. I believe it's also in the window menu, and once you put it there, every time you launch it, it's going to go to that desktop.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. Is there an Apple TV app for office hours, or did I miss the reason why not?
Time and money. That's the answer. Time and money.
You mean building apps takes time and money?
It's crazy. Yeah. So there's no app. You can watch it on the Apple TV through YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and you put you search for us and you see the live stream there, you can click it there and it'll take over and be a show for a live stream from YouTube. So that when I say you're watching it on Apple TV, you need to watch it on YouTube right now. Someday I've actually built an app that would do exactly what I didn't build it, but I designed it and had it built for somebody else. And it would do exactly what we wanted to do, just to put it in perspective. And the development budget on it was about $150,000 so to have it done. So, now it had a couple extra things. We could probably make it simpler, but it was not cheap to build something that is rock solid. Now we could probably hack something together that was a lot less expensive that we could start playing with. And we are looking at doing that this year. Our first push is we really want to get YouTube working perfectly, but we do want to experiment with things like Atmos and Vision. And to do that, we're going to have a basic app that does that. It'll probably be very simple, something that we can throw together potentially with ChatGPT. So we just ask ChatGPT to write us the app. But basically, I think that we're thinking about it where it just pops up, you hit a button, and it just opens up a live stream. Now, and it just does the thing, because we can use what's called the Foundation AV player that Apple makes. We probably won't make it. If we make an app for the Apple TV or for the phone, it'll probably be just on the Apple products, because we're going to be doing HDR, and HDR on Android and Windows is not well developed. so we will probably won't support them for quite some time, just because I don't have the time and money to put into it. It's incredibly painful to do HDR and surround on the other platforms. Next question.
John Merrill in Phoenix, Arizona, up next with any comments on the new Blackmagic HD8/ISO switcher. Looks good for the price.
Go, Jesse.
Absolutely. Looks like a great piece of kit. It is 4 XLR inputs away from being our next switcher.
And don't forget 4K.
Yeah. I think that I feel like I don't know what the situation. It kind of feels like Blackmagic gave up on 4K. Like they were like, well, not a lot of people are using it or whatever, and it's a bummer because for a lot of us that are doing events and everything else, like there's the Constellation, but everything else that's 4K is kind of old. Like there's one thing that solves it. It goes all the way up to 8K, and it's kind of like they feel like, okay, we gave you that. That's what you can buy if you want that, and then we're going to backfill all this stuff with 1080. Now we're a little bit more than a month away from NAB, so we can't assume that we're not going to see anything. But I do think, and I think that this is a good business decision. As a user, I want to see more 4K. As a business decision, I understand that Blackmagic probably sold an enormous number of these, hundreds of thousands of these little ATEM minis, and they're looking at how do you build the bridge to get to 4K, where most people, I have to admit that I've been buying 4K Blackmagic gear since 2016, so it's 7 years, and I've only done maybe 30 events out of well over, thousands of events. I've done about 30 of them for clients that are 4K. So like I've done lots of my own, but very few for the clients. Most of the production is still in 1080p. Go ahead, Bill.
I thought, Jesse, that there was an add-on plug-in box that does 4 and that you could add multiples of those. So is that not a solution for you?
It is, but once you start getting into modules, then I'm thinking, why am I not using an actual dedicated, mixing device that is really built for that one task? And then I'm not going to get the module.
Okay, fair enough. I just wanted, I remember watching the announcement, and I was pretty sure that they had an audio subsection, but there you go.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I think there are two things there. 4K is one of them. The other is the switch to SDI. So those of us that bought into the minis all have HDMI. So the jump to SDI will be a significant jump. And I suspect that if you want to do that at the right price, when 4K is available, that might be the time to do it.
Yeah, it is a, I'm just looking for, and one thing that I will say is that the one thing that they changed as well is, they do have 4 quarter-inch analog audio inputs, so it is 4. You're looking for 8, Jesse? Is that the?
So what I want is 4. So if I'm doing a 4 XLR ins, if I'm doing a small event, that's plenty. And if I'm doing a large event, we're going to be taking the XLR outs from a proper switching board and plugging them into the Vision mixer.
Yeah, it's got 4. It's got 4 of the. This is new to it as well. It's got 4. It does have 4 quarter-inch jacks. I don't know whether those can be converted. I don't know if they can be switched to Mac or line. Mic or line is the only question I have there. The interesting thing about this one that the Constellation doesn't have is the Constellation was like 64 in and 2 out, and this is 64 in, 64 out. So this is more developed as far as an audio pipeline. So Marty.
Yeah, I was really excited about this product because I do integrations, and right now I'm working for doing a music club, and the thought of being able to switch these cameras and bring in multiple channels of audio from the mixer to do in stems so that I can customize the mix for the stream was really interesting until I saw that it used Maddie instead of Dante.
It just adds another thing. You have to convert it to Maddie. That's the RME. That's the $1,500 RME or whatever that you need to do that conversion. And then you're there. It's one of those things that it's always so close. And their audio is getting better. There's so much in this little switcher. I would love to see I'm looking forward to seeing what the next version that takes all this technology that they're putting together. The next rack mountable version. The problem I really have with the switcher in general is I hate having all the I/O in the switcher, because that is, I would never build a system that way. So I look at it and I go, this is great. Now where's my rack mountable version? Because what we do is our control surface is an Ethernet. And the reason that matters is because if I'm going to build a system, I want to put it in a rack. And in that rack, I'm going to have all my I/O. When you take all your I/O and you put it in the back of your panel, now you've got this huge snake or mess of cables or all this other stuff that's going to go out right onto your desk. And now you can't, and just when it's all plugged in, just start moving that thing around and figuring out where you want to put it. It's just, so if you're doing a permanent installation, like a school or a church or something like that, or you're going to, some corporate stuff, but I literally I was walking into a facility the other day and I looked down and I was like, where's I see the panel. What switcher is it hooked up to? Oh, it's in the panel. I was like, oh, okay. This is going to be hard, and getting logistically, it's super painful to put it in the panel. So that's why I'm waiting for the next thing, because I was like, that's not going to move anything for me. But I like what they're doing with the features. I do think it's funny that they added so many Ethernet connections in the back. I was like, I wonder what they're going to do with those. I don't think it's just going to be a networking router. Next question.
Next one comes from Frederick Eckert in Bad Herrenalb, Germany, and he says Blackmagic Design includes Fairlight in their switchers. It looks like the feature set of Fairlight is able to be a live audio switcher and not only a post-audio console. Could Blackmagic Design release an audio switcher?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I guess they could, but I got in the 90s, I got to go to a early DAW shootout in New York City, and the company that impressed me the most was Fairlight. They really had their audio stuff together. They had a beautiful control surface for that, and I think BMD has taken the Fairlight components that they needed to support the audio they want to support in a switcher. I'd love more in the ATEM switcher as an audio person to get a better audio mixer in there, but I don't think they're going to release a separate audio device. That's not their business.
I mean, they have a separate. I mean, they still have the Fairlight board, the Fairlight processing boards. I mean, they have. There's other Fairlight hardware that they're doing. It's just really expensive. It's not really designed for live to the point that was made earlier. But it is. It would be if there was better I/O in and out. And I know that again, this is what Marty pointed out. If there was better I/O, I'd probably be a lot more interested in the switcher, but still I just kind of embed everything downstream from the switcher because of that. I'd also be interested if they started adding some panning for we're going to talk about this in the second hour, but some 5.1 tools would be useful in the mixer as now that it has 64 in and 64 out. A reminder that you can ask questions. So if you've got any questions before the end of the hour, general questions before the end of the hour, and also a reminder that we'll be talking about surround sound. So if you understand everything about surround sound and you could teach it, then you probably don't need to listen to the next hour. You should have been on the panel. If you have any questions or any kind of mysterious part of 5.1, definitely throw those questions in for the second hour, and make sure to vote on the questions so that we know what order you want us to ask them in. All right, let's go to the next question.
Next question comes from some David Brady in New York City, and David says, is anyone using X-Keys in conjunction with BitFocus Companion? I realize that X-Keys has its own macroing language for standalone use. Do you need to do any programming or EEPROM flashing, or does Companion just do it?
I don't know if Companion just does it, but there's an enormous amount of, I used to use X-Keys pretty extensively, and there's an enormous amount of interface going in and out of X-Keys where it's not just this key does this. You can build all kinds of scripts and macros and all kinds of other things. So I would be very surprised if there isn't someone who's worked out a tight integration with X-Keys. X-Keys, for those of you who are listening, are it's what happened before Companion, and they have all kinds of keys. They have just contact closure systems. They have a lot of other things, and then they have a whole interface that you can use to build a bunch of behaviors. And I used to build a lot of things inside of it, and so it's really robust, and it's not as extensive as Companion, but we were using it very successfully. If they don't integrate together, that would be crazy. I don't know for sure whether they do or not, but I would be very surprised if there's not a way to have X-Keys fairly tightly tied into Companion. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. Continuing the earlier discussion on delaying by frames, are you adjusting the video to match the audio or the audio to match the video? Isn't audio more often ahead of the video? Thanks for explaining further.
Yeah, you almost always delay the audio, and the audio almost always comes in faster, which is kind of funny because in the real world, the video comes in faster. In reality, light reaches us faster. And it's why if you're ever going to make a mistake about delaying your audio, you want to delay it a little too much rather than a little too little, because our brain will very quickly adjust for the video being a little ahead of the audio, because that's how we see it every day, is that the video is coming. If someone the audio is coming a millisecond behind the video for every foot. So if you see someone 30 feet away, they're literally a frame behind. Their audio is a frame behind them at 30 feet. So and so your brain understands what to do with that. If the other way, audio coming through, and the reason for that is that when you process audio and video, the audio takes a lot less to process. It's a lot less data, and the DSPs and everything else can manage it at a much lower rate. And we oftentimes the expectation is it's going to go through really fast, and so video takes longer. Now, if you gen lock things, there's all kinds of things you can do with the video to try to keep it down to the minimum delay, but it's generally going to be at least a couple frames behind the audio because it just takes more time, more processing to do it. So generally you're delaying audio, and there's individual delay units that you can just get that are just a little box that just does delay. A lot of things like the mix pre that we have here has a delay built into it, so we can do that there. So there's a lot of things that you can do the delay with hardware, and then you just dial it in. A lot of them will have up to, oftentimes 500 milliseconds or half a second is pretty common, to have in delay. You don't want to delay it more than you have to, but you can turn that up a little bit on a lot of hardware devices. So that's how you delay it. If your video gets ahead of your audio, and it does happen. So when we do some surround processing that we've done in the past, we might have to delay it. We have, in one case, we have to delay it about 400. We have to delay the video 400 milliseconds, which may not seem like a lot to you, but it takes. Now you're storing, uncompressed UHD for 400 milliseconds. It's a lot of data. So it's got to have a huge buffer. So delaying video, when video gets ahead of the audio, we panic because there's no easy way to fix that. There's something very wrong with our system if the video gets ahead of the audio. So if audio gets ahead of the video, it's kind of normal. We do it all the time. Next question.
Albie Lopez in San Antonio, Texas is up next. The question is, has anyone set up a vMix with TalkBack in a system? Wait, I've managed to get a different one that popped up.
A misfire there. Hold on, let's pull that back again here.
Okay, let me get that closed out, and we'll get back up.
I don't know where that went.
Albie's, it's the second one down there.
There's another one above it. Try refreshing your frame there.
Okay. Well, let's just do it. Paul Terry Wallace, Austin, Texas, is up next. Discuss why 48 volts is superior to 12 volts with the ability of 48 volts to run less amps through the wiring. Are we moving from a 12 volt to a 48 volt low voltage world? Will this eliminate lead acid batteries, I presume?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So Watt's law, power is voltage times current. You have to have voltage, which is the push, and you have to have current, which is the flow. So if you increase the volts by 4, you can get the same power with 1/4 the current. When there's a new development in your area and you double the number of houses, the power company doesn't have to add new wire. They can just change out the transformers on either end and send a higher voltage to you and the same amount of current because you need thicker wires to carry more current. Are we moving from 12 volt to 48 volt low voltage world? I don't have an answer to that question.
Go ahead, John.
So yes, Jeff hit it right on the head. I use pi voltage times current to equal power. What happened was last week at Tesla's Investor World conference, they stated that the cars are going to be moving to 48 volts so that the wires didn't have to be so large. That's what prompted this question, I'm sure, with Paul.
Next question.
Next question again comes from Albie Lopez in San Antonio. Has anyone set up vMix with TalkBack to produce a system that communicates with 4 local channels and the vMix calls separately? I'm hoping someone can clarify how it works with the different buses that vMix has. And he notes he's using a Focusrite Claret with X-Touch.
I don't know very many people within our group that use the vMix call. I think that there are some that are just not on the panel today. A lot of us have moved, as Zoom ISO kind of took over, a lot of us kind of moved to, I actually bought the reason we have all these PCs at home, I know, is because I bought them to use vMix with vMix call and found that it wasn't for me, stable enough to do that. So I didn't, we didn't find that to be a great experience. And so we turned them into Zoom machines. So I don't, I think that, I think one of the inputs that we have here is that you can dedicate one of the 8 buses to vMix call. So that might be another way to look at that. So maybe that helps you point you in the right direction. Next question.
Dave Burke in Alexandria, Virginia. Up next, when you use a language generator like GPT to assist in writing something, for example, a blog post for your website, do you feel obligated to disclose that with the post? If you use it for a video script, should you disclose it to your client?
Go ahead, Nigel.
So I don't know legally you're obligated, but I would put a whole bunch of warnings around this. Someone very generously ChatGPT me and to give me a view of what they thought of me, and only half of it was completely wrong. So make sure that you, when you use something, you need to double check it. I would probably, if I was the client, want to know whether you had done that. I mean, I don't necessarily care as long as you checked it and you know it to be true. But the other thing, I think there's a very interesting series on Netflix, a very famous story called Pepsi, Where's My Jet? When people put things out in public which they haven't really checked and thought through very well. So it's much more important to make sure your copy, your content is right, and then give credit where you need to as you go.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
I don't feel morally obliged to, but depending on the client, we might be contractually obliged to if we're under an NDA and these tools have some public form of what you're putting in and what it's generating for you. You could be violating that NDA. So I would double check with the client and double check with the text generator that you're using.
Go, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm going to respectfully disagree with Nigel on half of that. By the way, same thing. I don't know legally, but ethically, morally, absolutely not. With the caveat that you probably shouldn't be doing it. At the very least, you want to certainly check it. Don't generate something and then send it off without proofreading it. But in other words, you don't disclose that you use spell checker or Grammarly to correct your grammar or anything else. You can generate something, but I wouldn't put it out there as a disclaimer because it basically says to either your readers or your client, I don't really give a crap about what this stuff is. I just need something to be there, or I need a script to give you. There's no reason that you hired me because none of me is in this article or script.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's a lot of reasons sometimes to throw that in there because you can describe something. Again, I think that we also need to look at whether it's a technical thing that you're putting up or just something that needs to look nice, as far as introducing something. If it's technical, you absolutely have to check it out. If it needs to look nice and just telling people this is how you register or this is how you do this, it just has to read well, and a lot of times what I will say is that ChatGPT's English is far better than the average person writing, even copywriters, to be honest with you. It is, that's why it sounds so sure of itself, is because it's just using proper English. Go ahead, Bill.
I've been standing in front of scripts in voice booths for 60 years now, and I will tell you that there's a voice thing that happens with these. I'm starting to see more and more scripts that I can tell just on the first reading came through this system. That does not make them bad. It makes them consistently in the same type of well-crafted, semi-active, semi-passive voice, and I look at them and they just feel to me like eating soda crackers. There's nothing wrong with it, and if you're hungry and want some salt and fat, it's a satisfying thing to put in your mouth and chew up, but the magic is not there. Yeah. And I haven't seen anybody who's been able to generate a script that really sings the way that maybe 10% of the scripts I've stood in front of over my whole career. You read it, you go, oh man, that's good. And that's going to be fun to read. And I just don't get that kind of magic out of anything I've seen out of ChatGPT so far. Maybe it'll get there.
I think that it's kind of like if someone can build me a handcrafted coffee mug that is really, really nice, I'd much rather use the handcrafted one. So if someone's really a crafts person when they're writing something, then I'd much rather have what they wrote. But for the most part, a machine-generated one that fills the volume that I need is better than everybody trying to make their own mugs. And so the thing is that and right now everybody's trying to make their own, like they write their own copy, and most of I would say 70% of copy that I read on a day-to-day basis is pretty bad on the internet. And so ChatGPT is better than that. I will completely agree that it's not better than the top 20 or 30% of writers that are doing great work. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach, Florida. Thoughts or experience with modeling mics like the Universal Audio Townsend Labs Sphere that emulates most well-known mics like the Neumann U47, U87, Sennheiser MKH416, Shure SM7B, and Ribbon mics and so forth?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated by mics like this. I'm curious if anyone has used it. It blows my mind in terms of the physics that they're supposedly emulating. I know you can enter room dimensions, for example, into the software to help it do its calculations. But the fact that this mic in the capsule, and it's got two capsules, that it can emulate reasonably well all these different mics that have physics, like a shotgun mic has some physics behind what makes it a shotgun mic. So I'm just fascinated if anyone has some experience with them.
I'm fascinated by them as well. And so I'm definitely looking at, there's a couple different mics that do a lot of these modeling, and I know that Courtney usually has one. So if you see Courtney on Ask Again, I know he has one that he seems to like. And so I am very fascinated by them. I haven't bought any of them yet. They're in the price range where it's kind of like, well, it better work, like it's the $400 or $500 range or above. Next, some of them are $2,000, but they range from about $400 to about $2,500, and they just haven't been in a range where I've felt like I was ready to pounce on that. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Fred Eric Eckert in Bad Herrenab, Germany. Has anyone used Bassotech for audio treatment for a small studio or an insert studio? And he's got a link there to the product.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I've not used it. From looking at it quickly, it looks sort of like and then this is actually a use for the product, the pads you see on the rotary cleaners, industrial cleaners for floor, that kind of open cell foam mesh. But their actual absorption coefficient curves there, you see that green line is about 4 inches of this material, and it's doing a really good job of absorption down to about 400 hertz. And that's a little better than the same amount of linear fiberglass, the Owens Corning 701, which is sort of typical product. So this looks like it might be promising for acoustic treatment.
Yeah, it looks really interesting. Next question.
Jack Cannon in Phoenix, Arizona is up next. What camera angles would you like to see in a multicam outdoor interview with a host and 2 guests? 1 up, 2 up, 3 up product shot?
Go ahead, Jesse.
It really depends on how many resources you have financially and in terms of human strength. If bare minimum, I'd say 3 cameras, 1 locked on the host, 1 locked wide, and then a human operator going between the two guests as they speak. And if they start to speak simultaneously, you zoom out and get them both at the same time. If I were building this in a comfortable range, I would say 5 cameras with 5 operators, 1, 2, 3 for the host and the 2 guests, 1 wide, and then the product camera, I'm not sure what it's being applied to, but I'd have a 5th operator and a 5th camera for that product shot.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when we have that there, you'll have the 2 people being interviewed, and a lot of times I try to separate the moderator out a little bit. That just gives me a place to frame it. So they're going to talk to them here. And basically what we want to do is where I position this person is I want to have a camera on the wide shot that will get past my moderator even if they lean forward, and get to when I think about a person, really bad, I want to see the far side of the far eye. So I want to, when this person's talking to the moderator, I want to see the far side of the far corner of their far eye in my wide camera here. Same with the moderator. So I usually like these really wide, so that I can do that. And the risk that you have to what is that the people will lean into that shot. So that's the thing you have to worry about as far as them leaning in. And that's where, and then you always have, as Jesse mentioned, a center shot. That's your safety shot. That's going to be the wide establishing shot of them talking to each other. But you have these 2 long shots, and those are the minimums. And then what we do is then exactly what Jesse was talking about is we split those oftentimes with 5 cameras, so that if someone leans in, I have a now, and what you're going to want here is I prefer, especially people are going to be seated, I actually prefer PTZs because it's not just money. It has to do with the fact that it's a real distraction to have that many people around. They'll make eye contact with everybody. And so a set of PTZs is going to work way better in a lot of ways. There's a couple things about them. You can pre-program them. So you can say, I want this PC to be here. I want it over the shoulder. I want a single. And that's all just pushing a button. You're not telling anybody anything. You're just going boom, 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 boom. And it just reframes them to what you want. And so I usually prefer to have these be PTZs that can be all in a controller. Now, one thing that we do here is if these guys are going to walk on, the far camera here, so the moderator will be here, the far camera here, this one will be operated. And the reason we operate that one is because following someone walking, if they're going to come on, is harder to do with a PTZ. So we have one operated camera here that's going to, and it's also grabbing the best shots of your guests. And then the next step here is whether where you want to put it. You typically want to try to put when you're outdoor, you're going to have to figure out whether you try to arc something over it. So you may goalpost it so it's out of frame, but you might put 2 junior stands on either side and run a speed rail across it. And what you're doing is you're goalposting right over top of where your product is, and you can put a camera that looks down on it. And so it looks like you're outside. It looks like you're outside, but you've got these 2 big goalposts that send it through. And that's how we've done a lot of these in the past. Next. And now we're going to switch subjects to surround sound. If any of our guests or any of our guests and panelists, want to add something to what we're talking about here, just go ahead and throw it into panel discussion. And if you've got questions about surround sound, go ahead and ask your questions now into the thing. Otherwise, it'll be really short because we're really here. We're going to try to spark some questions, and then we're going to move on. So surround sound is, and I'll start off while I'm seeing if any of the other folks on the panel want to jump on. But a lot of what we're trying to do is we're going to talk a lot about surround sound as we move forward. And we want to kind of just talk about some of the very basics. And I think that we kind of touched on it a little bit with the psychoacoustics that Jeff talked about earlier, and really talking about what those, what that means. I'm trying to make this kind of a more as general as possible. Just a discussion about all the different ways that we do this, because we're hearing a lot of different things like spatial audio, and we talk about Atmos, and we talk about surround, and there's lots of different brands of those things. And what we want to do is think about, what those are, and really understand what we're listening to. I started the first project I got into with surround. They started throwing out numbers, and I didn't know what they were. I was like, they were like, well, we got to decide whether it's a 714 or 514 or 916. And I was like, what are they talking about? And so what we're trying to do is avoid that, and get into that, so that when we start bringing more people on that are going to talk about surround, which is going to happen pretty often as we get ready to go, that you aren't asking the most simple questions, as that we have some basis. So today is really about those basics of just talking through it. And we're going to definitely, over the next coming weeks and months, dig very deep into this concept. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I think we need to talk about those numbers and figure out what they are. Talk about base management. And I've thrown in some questions that kind of lead along this, as far as what's the difference between an LFE and a subwoofer, those kind of basics that we need to get. And, there's a long history back. We're approaching 100 years. I think it was like late 1930s that Disney with Fantasia took the Flight of the Bumblebee and spun it around the theater in Fantasound. And so we've come a long way, and we still have a long way to go. And immersive audio is probably the broadest term we could use to capture all of the spatial and surround and Atmos and everything else.
Yeah, and I will say that to me, immersive audio or spatial audio or surround, as I've worked with it, when it's done well, I feel like the difference between mono and stereo is like 1/10 the difference between stereo and the various Atmos is what I've had the most experience with. It's just because there's so much. What happens perceptually is that what we found, and this is, we'll talk more about the exact channels, but if you're sitting there and you're listening to something, as you hear things from different parts of the world around you, whether it's above you, below you, to around you, et cetera. As you hear these things, what happens, and I didn't see this coming until about halfway through my first immersive project, is as you hear things, what happens is it tickles your brain. It goes, hey, there's something over here. And you will start to pay attention to that, and you'll know that it's there. And so as we keep on touching different parts of what you're perceiving, what happens is it creates a bigger space in your head. I know that sounds like a very touchy-feely kind of thing, but it actually creates a bigger space on what you're paying attention to. Then when you drop something into the center channel, so you put someone right in front of it and you go right down that middle channel, you perceive them as more present. So I watched a music video at a pretty big stage, and the first 4 minutes is just surround music and a lot of ambient of an outdoor street area and everything else. And then the singer starts to sing, and I had never perceived anyone more in front of me in audio than I did at that moment, because they had spent the whole time building up how I perceived the space that I was in mentally, and then it dropped in. So that's one of the reasons that surround is so interesting. And I think that a lot of times also, when we start to do a lot of the stuff where we're moving the instruments around, the thing that I notice, and you notice it a lot with some of the Apple stuff that's being done, is that I'm more present to way more instruments. So instruments that were kind of muddy in stereo, I suddenly hear them in a clear way because they have a place, in the mix. And so it's yeah. Go ahead, Marty.
So yeah, this surround sound is a really interesting thing. There's two sides of it also. On the consumer side of the media chain, there is how we set up a sound system, whether it's 3.1, 5.1, 12.4.2, whatever it is. How complex, how immersive are we setting up our sound systems, and what are the psychological effects that's going to have on how we perceive audio and where we perceive them from and all that. But then on the creator side of the media chain is how do we create those things, right? How do we do a surround mix? What kind of equipment do we need? What features do we need to look for in equipment, whether it be a DAW for post-production or whether it be a live sound console if you're doing a live event? How do we create those different kinds of mixes? And then there is perspective. Like I would say that my natural tendency would be as a person in a live situation. It's surround sound. There's sound coming from all around me. There's room sound. There's feature noises. There's different things going on. And then there's a person or people in front of me talking, and, in real life, that's how I would perceive it. But I was visiting with a friend of mine who is at an Atmos post-production studio, whose, spoiler alert, is going to be on the show in a few weeks. So we'll learn more about this. And they were playing me something, a project that they were working on. And the producer of the project, this is a musical project, wanted the surround mix done, putting the listener in the middle of the band on stage, as if the listener is a musician on stage. And the perspective that I was hearing was quite strange, actually, to me. I was hearing the lead vocalist not coming necessarily from the front, but coming from around me, like 180 degrees in front of me, with maybe a little bit of bias in front, but the perspective was kind of weird. And so, that's a creative choice, where to put the listener in the surround field.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is when you talk to most surround engineers that I've talked to, everybody starts by being really aggressive. Like, I want to put everybody all around you and everything else. And everybody always settles down to something else. Everyone has you talk to all of them. They're like, everybody's got great ideas at the beginning. Like, I'm going to have it swinging around and I'm going to do all these things. And then after a while they go, and then we're going to make it something that you don't necessarily, that I think almost everybody I know leans into slowly getting into. You're not going to notice it very much. but every once in a while, but you just feel it. You feel like you're there. And we're not trying to do something that catches your eye or catches your ear so much as to just make it something that feels like you're immersed in it. But there's also, I find I have a pretty robust system at home. It's not I don't have any. My speakers are placed higher, so it's kind of a weird high. It was just because of where it needed to be, but they are. But it's just a 7.1 and. It's funny that every once in a while I'll go, oh, they're really doing something here. Like most of the time you just hear it and it's around you and you're just used to it being there. But every once in a while you can hear them really play. Someone's playing with it. But a lot of times that happens in small bits, like just a little bit of like, we're going to do something that excites you over here or does something over here. I will say that if you have a surround system, especially with explicit speakers, it's really fun to listen to movies where someone has taken advantage of the surround system, it's the immersive experience, because you just hear them putting, and a lot of times it's putting rain and putting ambient noise. A lot of this is recorded, ambience is really what they use it for. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
So nitty-gritty basics, we've thrown out 5.1 and 5.1.4 and 7.1 and all that. So we oftentimes get up to 3 numbers separated by periods, 5.1.4. First number is horizontal channels. So those are channels, and this can be delivery channels, the mix channels. This can be speaker channels, actual playback channels. But we're talking about in a 5.1.4 system, there will be 5 speakers in the horizontal plane. The .1 is a low frequency effects storage or a subwoofer speaker. And it was given the .1 because it's a limited bandwidth. It's only low frequency. So the idea was, a tenth of the data, but it's actually a whole lot less than that. And then the last number is number of hight channels, ceiling channels.
So if you've got it's 5.1.4, you've got, that's left, right, typically left, right, center, LFE, left surround, right surround. And then if you add 7, you're going to have 2 speakers in the rear. So they're not to the sides. The 7 will put 2 speakers in the rear. And then if it's the 5.14 or 7.14, means that you've got 4 speakers above you. And there are, very set prescribed. It's very easy for you to lay that out. We won't show the images here, but you can definitely find them quickly. If you do a search for 7.14 speaker configuration, you'll see those there. And anyway, and then 916 is another one. And my productions don't go any higher than 916 because there's 16 channels in an SDI. So that's why we stop at 16. We stop at 916, but that you can definitely go over that. You can add more speakers, and there are multiple ways to do that. So one of the things that there's a lot of as you start to go into the higher speaker settings. Now, the other thing to think about there is also getting out of, we think about speakers, but then you start moving past speakers into objects, and that's what Atmos does, which allows you to say, I'm going to define an object, and I'm going to put it into 3D space, and it's going to figure out what part of that object shows up in this speaker versus that speaker. So basically, it is going, as that object moves around, so you have much more resolution because you're no longer trying to mix it. I'm going to mix it to this speaker and that speaker. You're just saying, I put an object here. I'm going to make this object go around, and it's figuring out how much of it ends up in one speaker versus another speaker, and it's doing that calculation for you. And when it's processed and you have all those objects, what that means is that whatever resolution of the system that you have, it's going to put it in the right place. It's just going to put it in a finer detail depending on how many speakers that you actually have there. And so you have, so that's kind of the process of how Atmos works, is that you have, 100 and I believe it's 128 channels. I always forget exactly the number, but I think it's that you can mix and match between bed and objects. And so typically there's a handful of them that you're going to put things into the bed. So you don't put everything into objects. You're going to put things into the bed, and then you're going to put then you're going to have objects that you're able to animate and move around to make that work. And so that gives you a lot more resolution to kind of work with, and a lot more dexterity of how you have things interact with each other. Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, like you're saying, with surround sound, you're no longer mixing to individual channels that represent speakers. You're typically working with...
In surround sound you might be, but in Atmos you're not.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's
In Atmos,
you're
yeah.
treating those. I mean, it depends on what you're in Atmos or other things that are doing those object based. Atmos isn't the only one that does that. There's other systems that do that.
And so you're working with a panning system that is specifically set up for that. And as you're moving your joystick around and placing an object in 3D space, like you're saying, you not only have left and right and up and down, but you also have closer and farther, right?
Right.
You can place an object closer to you or farther away from you, even in the same axis. That's kind of really interesting.
And the thing to remember as you start to go through this is that is a very complicated calculation. It's not making it louder or softer. Making it closer or further away and giving that position is taking into account the your head reference, right? So we talked about this a little bit, and Jeff talked about it a little bit earlier, which is the HRTF, the head referenced transfer function, and that is that as something comes towards you, your head creates, and Jeff is going to describe this in a previous show, much more detailed than I'm going to, but your head basically creates an acoustic shadow. So it changes the timbre of it. So one ear, if the ear is going to hear it both at a different speed, so it's going to get to one ear faster than the other, but it's also going to change the tone as it gets to the other ear. And that's how we're making a decision about where it is and whether it's above us, to the side of us. And we actually, as a human being, know our own, HRTF, because everybody has a different one because our heads are different. So, but we know where that is, and we make that calculation. When you're saying when you're doing something that has to get closer or further away, you are having to calculate all of those things to use all of the speakers that are around you to deliver that experience back to the person that's listening to it. So it's not just I made it louder because it got close. I used to think that's what it was, made it louder, but it's doing a lot of other things of how it's managing that tone to make that work. Go ahead, Jeff.
So let's take a moment and talk about center channel because especially with cinema sound, things began as mono.
There's a lot of drama here.
Behind.
I will say there's a lot of drama between music mixers and cinema mixers, mixing engineers over the center channel. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, so cinema started with mono, and then when it went to multi-channel, it went to 3 channels behind the screen because, as we talked about last week with the precedent effect, you will localize sound to where it gets to you first, the law of the first wavefront. So if you simply put a left speaker and a right speaker in a movie theater, anyone who's not sitting in the center will localize the dialogue to the speaker they're closer to. So we keep all the dialogue in the center behind the screen, and no matter where you sit, the talking is coming out of the talking heads on the screen. In music, we primarily have mixed in stereo, and we use a phantom center to put the lead vocal appearing to come from the center. There's no way we call it phantom center because there's no speaker there, but it sounds like it's coming from the center because it's playing same amplitude and same time out of the 2 speakers. And yes, when music gets remixed in surround, some mixers will put the lead vocal in the center channel, some mixers will put the lead vocal in the left and the right phantom center. Some of that is because they don't trust that the consumer at home has a quality center channel speaker. They may have good left and right. It's less so now because people are buying surround sound systems or they have a sound bar. But when people went from stereo and added on, and they bought sort of a surround add-on kit, they had really good hi-fi left-right speakers, and then they added a center channel that was lesser quality. And so mixers were worried about that and didn't want their lead vocal to come out of a crappy speaker.
And the problem you really get into, I think that the one that I always think about on my system at home, the one that is the example of all the things that you have to worry about is Rush. The Atmos mix of Rush's Tom Sawyer is probably when the instrumental starts, it is one of the most impressive Atmos mixes. But as soon as Geddy Lee starts but as soon as Geddy Lee starts to sing, they did it in stereo, and it sounds odd because of the way it's processed. You're just like, well, it sounds like this. It doesn't quite get to you in the right way that's there. So, and that if they had taken his vocal and put it into the center channel, it would have come out it would have been much more present. The song would be much better, in that area, and to the point where I can't really listen to it in I can't listen to it in Atmos because the vocals are coming through coming down those channels. But and I love that song. Anyway, so I've seen Rush a couple times live. So anyway, but it's a really, when the Spatial stuff first came out on the Apple TV, I immediately sat down and just started going through song after song after song. And that was one of the most impressive ones, except for his singing. And almost all cinema engineers that I talked to immediately, they don't make fun of the music engineers, but they definitely dig into the fact that they're not using the center channel. Because all cinema engineers use the center channel all the time. I do stuff where we actually stream live to theaters, and it's just interviews. It'll be interviews of the actors and so on and so forth that we work with, and it's streaming out to a bunch of theaters, and we stream that in we can do it in stereo, but we do it in 5.1. And the reason we do it in 5.1 is because of the center channel. I want to send the interview folks talking to the center channel of the theater. And the only way I can get to that center channel is to use the 5.1 system as opposed to a stereo system. And so the whole pipeline, people are always like, we have one channel. Why are we doing 5.1? and it's because we're doing that. Yeah. So, and for some reason, Jason has put me in, it was very confusing, Jason.
Sorry,
so don't
a cable hit my switcher.
Anyway. So it is important. The center channel is really the thing that comes up a lot. And I will admit to, a lot of times what Jeff was talking about is that if your center channel isn't really strong, you have a hard time. This is why a lot of people there's been a big thing where people are starting to mix the audio, mix folks back into the music, and all the sound effects are getting louder in comparison to the to the voice tracks, and everyone's turning. It's really interesting. My family, my daughter and my wife specifically, immediately turn on captions for almost everything. Definitely Christopher Nolan films. No one in my family watches a Christopher Nolan film without that. And they're like, well, you should just have a stronger center channel. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, I don't, it's a little bit of a mess. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff. Did I call you already?
I was just going to say that Tom Sawyer mix put me off of spatial music for at least a solid month when I heard it.
So you heard the same thing, right? It was like this weird reverberation between his voice. And
I can't listen to it. It ruined the song.
Yeah,
I have to go back to the stereo mix.
Yeah, I do too. And it can be fixed. What's interesting about this is that how they're doing a lot of the spatialization is a lot. If you see, there's a bunch of apps now that you can get that will separate out instruments. It'll say, like, you can get there's this one that my daughter uses to practice bass, where you can say, I just give me the vocal, the bass, and it'll just take any old song and just use AI to just rip it apart into multiple tracks. And I think that that's a lot of what they're doing. Talking to some folks, for some of the songs, they're using pretty high-end versions of this to separate those things out, to just make a little bit of separation. If they have the tracks, obviously they just use the tracks. But for some things that have been flattened, they're using AI to spread that back out again, but it's not working all the time. Go ahead, Jason.
What's that app?
I'll find it for you. Go ahead, Jason.
If I had one wish when it came to surround mastering and surround mixing in general, it would be use less compressor, use more EQ.
Yeah.
Like, just seriously.
Yeah, the one that I use on my phone is called Moises, Moises. And it's not designed to do surround. It's designed it'll separate out, though. It'll give you the vocal track, the guitar track, drum tracks, bass track. It'll just separate those, 5 or 6 different tracks out. Some of the DJ software now does it as well, which is really powerful. A lot of us love to try to pull elements out of a song that we could reinsert, like into, beat mix back into another song, so that you could do a kind of a foreshadowing of this next song you're going into. And we used to use, like, there was a band called The Shaman that had a Progen mix that would let us, it had all the tracks for their whole song, Moving Mountain. And you could literally just drop those in and then go into that song. But you were telling people for 3 songs that it was coming. And so those are the kind of things that you can now do with just processing. You can just process the thing in real time. It's kind of amazing. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's seen.
Oh, Jason.
Oh.
Yeah, go. Sorry.
No, sorry. It's Jeff Cohen. My fault.
Go ahead, Jeff. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I don't know if anyone's seen Apple Music recently added this feature where kind of a karaoke style for a number of songs, they can duck down the vocals and give you just the music.
It's funny. I played with it a little bit, and I was like, it's a lot harder to sing with the song when you take the vocal out. Like it's easy. Like you feel like you're doing well, and then you take the vocal out. And like, I don't know where to go now. Go ahead, Jeff.
So Jason mentioned compression and that kind of thing, and it's very common in music mixing to have overall bus compression, and that's been easy to do in stereo. Mm-hmm. You need to have a surround plugin to do it in surround. The problem with Dolby Atmos is that it never actually gets mixed together until it's played, because the objects are not mixed in until it actually hits the individual person's playback system. That's when the objects are mixed in. So if you have, say a guitar solo that you want to fly around as an object, it will not be going through the same bus compression as the rest of your mix. So that's something that mixers need to, it's a new thing that mixers need to deal with when mixing Dolby Atmos, is that objects do not go through any kind of bus that you can do to the beds.
Yeah. Next question.
Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota says, what would one need to set up a surround mix for a conference room in a live situation?
That would actually be pretty hard. And here's why.
Really hard.
So venues become really difficult because, how do you mix something? Generally, the surround works really, really well when you're in the center of what it's built around. As you start to move away from that center, I remember having a conversation with someone at THX, and we were at a theater at the ranch, and I said, so what are the best seats to sit in? And they're like, every seat's a good seat. And I'm like, okay, what are the best seats to sit in? I get that there's like 10. There's like 10. So it turns out it's right in the middle. For a regular theater, it's right in the middle, obviously, of it. And you count the speakers. And so you go, if it's 4 speakers or 5 speakers, you just go to between the third, second and third, or right at the middle speaker. If it's IMAX, you want to lean back a little bit. You want to come back up to the upper third of not all the way to the back, because you won't hear the surrounds. You won't hear the surround speakers, but you pull back about 3 or 4 rows from the center of the space. And then you take the middle one and you go 2 either way, and that's pretty. And there's 2 rows that are good in that area, and then that's pretty much it. And if you watch every theater in like San Francisco, those rows will be full no matter how empty the theater is. Like those are there because the people who know what they're doing all sit in those rows, and we all consider it's sold out when those rows are taken. like literally, I often buy tickets to the things that I go to a solid 2 weeks in advance. Like I don't go to a movie less than 2 weeks in advance because I have to be able to buy the ticket so that I can sit in the seats that I want. I'm not going to pay $150 take my family to something that is less than that. So a conference room where everyone's faced a different direction and everyone's in a round, it would be almost impossible. You could do cool things with it, you can move it around, but I don't think you would get a surround experience. The folks that are doing the most in live, I think, are L-Acoustic is the company that thinks a lot about how do you create something that feels surround no matter where you are. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
More speakers. You got to distribute to more and more speakers, and then you can do more channels, and now you have a larger system that you can send your objects to.
Yeah, the most speakers I've seen in one theater is a little over 180. Speakers in one venue, and it literally, they recreate the reverb, so it feels like you're there in a theater. And then they said, but it's not really real, and they turned it off, and immediately you just feel like your ears got sucked out of your head because there's no reverb in the building at all. And so, but you do have to. It's not just the speakers too; it's also the reverb. So it gets very complicated if it isn't there. And we are going to bring the folks from L-Acoustic on to talk this year. I'm not sure exactly when we'll bring them on, but we're going to bring them on because they're the ones that probably spend the most energy thinking about how to do surround and heavy effects. And they've got these processing units to manage many, many, many speakers and figure out how they're going to create that experience for people all throughout the venue. Next question.
Comes from Marty Adius in Maryland on the panel. Does a live audio mixer need to have a surround panner to do a surround mix?
To do it well, yes. Go ahead, Jeff.
I mean, you could work around it with a standard panner and various buses for the various pairs of channels. So your sides and your rears, you can set them up as pairs and use a standard panner, but it would be difficult.
Yeah, it's pretty hard. Pretty hard to do it with just without that there. Next question.
Jeff Francis, Columbia, South Carolina. What's the difference between the LFE, low frequency effects, and the subwoofer?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So Bill said it, LFE is a low frequency effects. LFE is a track, it is a storage, and a subwoofer is a speaker that plays low frequencies. The LFE will get played out the subwoofer, but the subwoofer also plays low frequencies from other channels.
And the subwoofer, it will take, if you feed it anything, right, it'll just grab onto it's a crossover where it just says, I'm only going to play these things. This is that correct, Jeff?
Yeah, that we'll get into when we talk about bass management. Okay. The subwoofer can play low frequencies. LFE is really, it's for effects. So LFE is for explosions, cannon, Godzilla, dinosaur footsteps, those kind of things. So the LFE actually has 10 dB more headroom than the other channels in a cinema. So if a cinema maxes out at a acoustic playback of 115 dB SPL, the LFE will play at 125 dB SPL. So it's when every other channel goes all the way down to 20 hertz and below. So all of the storage channels can support low frequencies. But if you've run out of headroom and you want that explosion to be even more powerful, there's your LFE.
And you can do a lot in the LFE. There's a couple movies. There's this thing that's on our wall in my where we watch TV in the TV room, and it will vibrate when the LFE goes to a certain level. I know there's a discussion about why it should be there, but anyway, that's not I don't control what's on that wall. So anyway, so it vibrates a little bit, and what's funny is when something big is going to happen and someone's trying to tell you that something bad's going to happen, you'll hear something and you will almost not hear it, but that thing starts to vibrate. It starts to vibrate. So then that's when someone's taking advantage of that LFE and they're just driving stuff into it. And there's been some experiments of giving, I think there's a movie that does, for the first half of the movie, it runs at something like 30, hertz or something like that and it just creates this uneasiness. And then they take it away and you suddenly feel a lot better. But they kind of build it up. So there's a lot you can do in that area. Next question.
Jeff Francis again, Columbia, South Carolina. What is bass management and why do I need it?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So if your speakers are not full range and can't go all the way down to 20 hertz, so we're talking about smaller home theater systems, we're talking about smaller studios, then we're going to use the subwoofer that can do low frequencies to supplement the bass of other channels. And so this is something that happens that there's a routing, that's the wrong button. So this is showing a 5.1. So there's 5 full range channels and an LFE track in the storage. And those go in the regular 5 channels, get high pass filtered, and those frequencies go to the smaller speakers. So they'll play things, in this case, it's showing 60 hertz and up, but it might be 100 hertz. And then all of those low frequencies get combined together from those 5 full range channels, and they get added to the LFE track, and they play out the subwoofer track. So that is bass management, which is taking your bass, your low frequencies from all the channels and sending them to the speakers that use them. Theatrical systems shouldn't need bass management because they should have full range and often are required if they want certification.
Next question.
Tommy Shantz, St. Paul, Minnesota. Having powered speakers, getting a dedicated AV receiver doesn't make much sense. What would be a good USB interface to get the signals? Is there a better solution?
An AV system that has XLR outs, which exist. It exists. And so Monoprice makes one. I think that there's a couple other companies that, I don't know if Monoprice is still selling the one that they have. They are expensive. So the AVRs are not inexpensive, but there are AVRs with balanced outs. And you can get, the most I've seen are 16 outs of one AVR, but some of them are less. They're 7 channels or 9 channels. So they're kind of dependent on, or 8 channels. There's a lot of different ones there, but they do start at about $2,000 and go up to about $5,000 or $6,000. and and we've used them in the past. What's interesting is if you're trying to, not that I would ever need to do this, but if you're trying to record something and you don't need all the objects, but you do need the surround, you need to record all the channels out of something that's coming in, let's say over your Apple TV. And you run it into one of these AVRs, and you can run XLR out of them and record the channels, so that it's not as good, because it's not going to be, the problem with that is that, of course, that AVR is balanced for the room that it's in. So what happens with an AVR, for those of you who haven't used these, is you have a little microphone that usually comes with it, and you plug it in and you set it where you're going to sit, and then it figures out what it does is it puts out a bunch of signals and figures out what the speakers have to do to have the proper volume to where you are going to be at reference. And then when you take that mic out, that's what's coming out of all those individual channels. But there are a handful of AVRs that will do that effectively. I don't know of any other better way to do that as far as getting those out to powered speakers. There's the problem you get into is a lot of the protection that's related to that. So the AVR, when it comes in, you can do it with raw stuff if you're developing something, but when you're watching something that grabs onto that, I am not certain, because something has to handshake that. We might get something in the chat with that, but I haven't seen anything that does that very well, other than using the AVR to extract it from a commercial broadcast. There's lots of things that you can do without that. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Hasman Kajar in Cape Town, South Africa. And he says, in the context of Apple Music, there is spatial audio and Dolby ATMOS. Is this interchangeable naming, or do they mean two different audio experiences?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Like everything Apple, they do their own thing. So spatial audio is kind of Apple's implementation of Atmos and surround. So you're not guaranteed, if some track says it's spatial audio, how many particular bed channels it has, or whether it has objects at all. And then when that goes, I listen primarily to spatial on AirPod Pros, and it actually, the signal that gets sent to the AirPod Pros, I believe, is a 5.1.2. And then the AirPod Pros make a binaural listening experience and basically place each of those 8 speaker channels around my head.
Yeah, and you will see the things that Apple will say Atmos or spatial, and they're not always interchangeable. Generally, an Atmos mix is an Atmos mix, and a spatial mix is something that Apple's processed to spatial. It's not truly not truly an Atmos mix. It's something that they're processing to make it feel like it's has more dimensionality, and that gets into what we were talking about before. I don't have any proof of that Apple's doing this, but a lot of people theorize that Apple is using machine learning to basically tear the songs apart, put them into, open them up in space, and then deliver them to you. Next question.
Next question is mine, actually, from San Diego, regarding soundstage positioning. Where does changing the sound perspective to match a listener's head-facing position come in relative to feeding them the same perspective as recorded? How does this fit into the surround discussion?
Go, Jeff.
So I guess, Bill, you're talking about head tracking, which is...
Yeah, kind of. At a symphony, even though there are multiple you're in a position in the audience. So when you turn your head, the sound is going to change hitting your ears. If you're wearing headphones or anything else that's supposed to be surround, I guess it would be up to the mixer to determine whether or not it's tracking your head positioning and changing that perspective. Or like wearing headphones, no matter which way you point your head, you hear the exact same stereo mix.
So the Apple AirPod Pros will do this when watching certain media, because if you're watching on your phone, it knows where your phone is positioned. So if you're watching media and you're hearing dialogue, it's right in front of you. But if you turn your head, it still sounds like the dialogue is coming from your phone that is sitting there. So if you have, and that's a setting in the headphones that you can turn on or off. You can turn off spatial.
Which I turn off pretty quickly. It drives me absolutely crazy. Like what happens is a lot of times I'll be watching and I'll stand up and I'll walk away. Suddenly it's behind me, and it's not something that I appreciate. I love hearing the stuff around me. I do not like the head tracking part of the calculation that Apple adds to their Apple stuff. Their headsets. I just prefer it to. I want to hear it all around me, but I walk a lot when I'm listening to stuff. So sitting somewhere, I don't usually appreciate that the same way.
I wonder if that comes from our conditioning of wearing headphones for so long, where that stereo perspective, no matter where you go with it, it always stays fixed.
Yeah, and I just want it to stay fixed. So maybe I'm too old. I don't like the moving around, my head moving. And when I'm testing stuff for streams, when I've done surround, a lot of times I think something's broken because I'm like, when something's broken, I'm like, oh, it's just my head. Like it's just like my head's in the wrong place. And you'll see me also to test something is it calculating in Spatial? I'll turn my head back and forth to see if it's doing that. Anyway, yeah. So the other thing to remember though is that as you record it, you have to think about those things as well. So we were doing a 360. This is probably 6 or 7 years ago. We were doing a 360 stream. These are with the Nokia Ozos, and we had a 4-camera Nokia shoot, and this is at NAB, and we were streaming it back, and we realized as we were setting up, every time we change cameras, you're in a different perspective. If you're watching a live show, those players are now in a different place in relationship to you, so we have to change the mix every time we cut the camera. And so what we did is we took a GPIO out of our ATEM, and we put it into the QL5, I think. And so basically we set up scenes so that when we cut from camera to camera, it would change that scene. And it turned out if you changed a little too fast, it was too abrupt. And if you changed too slow, you got this weird mix between the two, and it was disrupting. So we had to find just the right speed at which we would go. But basically we would activate that change to a scene based on what camera it was. So we had to automate that. Otherwise, it was impossible to try to make it work. And that worked pretty well, but we had to really know where those cameras, where the cameras were going to be. And moving the cameras meant we had to reset all of those positions. So we were pretty careful about that. Next question.
Hasma Kajar, Cape Town, South Africa. I have a 724 surround sound and mostly listen to Dolby Atmos music, also Dolby Atmos content from an ATV Plus. I failed to discern audio from the 4 ceiling speakers. Am I missing something in my configuration?
Go, Jeff.
Well, you could, as a test, you could unplug the other speakers and determine if there's any sound coming out of there or not. The track I'd point you to would be Elton John's Rocket Man in the Spatial audio version. The little guitar riff before the chorus flies over your head, so it's a pretty discernible ceiling move. Something that you'll also find when you start to, if you get them working and you unplug the other channels, you'll begin to discover as you're listening to this music how very compressed the audio is in the ceiling channels. Remember that though we're dealing with many, many, many more channels, we're not dealing with that much more data that were allowed in these files. They're bigger, but they're not, 8 times bigger. So the data compression is quite severe, especially in the ceiling channels. If you listen to the ceiling channels by themselves in most music, they sound absolutely horrible. And data compressed.
Yeah, it depends on what a lot of times we can make them sound as good. It's just that most people don't add that much data into the channels. So you can get them to where they're a solid, 64 per channel is usually pretty good. Actually, will sound, and they're not perfect that way. But you can make them a lot better if you want to push the envelope there. The other thing you'll notice is there's a lot of air up there, that it creates. So typically you don't hear things explicitly through the top speakers. You hear reverb through the top speakers. You hear the effect on the atmosphere. So they don't usually you don't hear a lot of things over your head, or at least I don't. Usually what happens is that I hear the effects of things that are going to the sides around me happening over top of it. And if you turn it off, you'll hear it, but you have to kind of be able to turn them on and off and you'll hear this kind of more spaciousness, is really what we usually see thrown into those top speakers. And some people will put things up there, but it's usually for effect. If they put them up there, they don't usually put them up there regularly, or at least, again, I don't hear them put them up there regularly. Next question.
Rob Collins, Kansas City, Missouri. For setting up a surround sound system, how important is having all the speakers at the same height in the room?
Go, Jeff.
Well, we talked about last week that we hear using time of arrival of our and head shadowing, and that gives us really good acuity in the horizontal plane, but we have less acuity in the vertical plane. So you can actually have your surround speakers slightly different angles. Generally, they're preferred to be at listener height or higher. And I think 15 degrees is the spec, but I can't recall if that's exactly right. Height often is your advantage in those because if there's more than one person in the room, that will get the sound to both of you because you get over someone's head.
Next question.
Jeff Cohen, Miami Beach, Florida. Thoughts on the way that Clubhouse implemented spatial audio to make it sound like participants are in different positions around you?
We're playing with that as well. I don't know how well it'll work. Blue Jeans has been doing it for a while in partnership with Dolby, where people are in different places based on it. Unfortunately, with Blue Jeans, it doesn't really calculate where they are on your screen. They just kind of make up something and they put people in. So sometimes you have one person on one side of the screen, another person on another, and the audio's not lining up with that. So we're working on how do we make that actually work. I actually like it. So I like having it spread out, not a lot, not like all around me, but I like it spread out a little bit across that because it does make me feel a little bit more, it makes me feel like it puts a position for me in it. If it's done too much, it seems it's disorienting. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, and that's a good point with trying to align it with video. With Clubhouse, of course, it's just audio. And so, yeah, I like it too. It puts a little bit of, just makes you aware there's a different person speaking. And then, of course, you could just see the little icon or thumbnail for that person blinking so you know who's speaking. But it's an interesting effect that you hear people in different spaces. Interesting, tough problem to align it with video positioning on a screen.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, would Logic be a solid entry-level platform for learning to mix surround and or Atmos content on a Mac OS without a surround monitoring system?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, if you've already got a Mac, Logic is a great option because it includes Apple's implementation of the renderer, the Dolby renderer, and it will actually render those multiple channels and objects into a binaural feed that can go right into your headphones. And so you can monitor this and mix right in Logic.
The one thing to remember is that you can mix for what you're listening to. So the physics of everything, you can try to simulate some of those things that are there. But if you mix to headphones, you're going to mix a surround sound for headphones. If you mix it into a room, you're going to mix it into a room. And if you mix it into a theater, you're going to mix it into a theater. And the physics are very different between the three. And so if you don't, so what we have is, there's headphones, there's near field, near field is generally a mixing room. So if the room is, let's say 20 by 20 or something like that, that's a near field mix. And then you have a theater mix. So when folks mix in a theater, they actually are sitting in a volume the size of a theater. So it's literally that build. And it's 55 feet long. It's 35 feet wide. It's got all the speakers where they need to be. And we're going to bring somebody on to talk about that in the future. But that allows them to hear how that is going to sound. Things that sound very full in a near field mix will feel very stark in a theater mix because it's not just that the speakers are further away. There's a bunch of soft things that are sucking up all that sound, and so it just doesn't get to you. So it's just and it took me a little while. I was like, I don't understand. I can mix this in a room and it'll sound fine in a theater. And we have a theater in our building as well as the room that we had with the 514. And walking between the two, it was like night and day. Like I suddenly realized you can't really mix a theater mix without the theater itself, the volume. Next question.
Next question is another one of mine. And this was interesting for me. As a video editor, I've been shocked at how much what I see impacts what I hear. Basically, cutting to the shot of a keyboard player kind of lets me hear the piano clearer. Is that typical? Can you discuss it, Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, totally. That your eyes definitely play into that. I've been doing our opera at the university has performed in several of the same venues every year. And it's an interesting difference between operas in a foreign language and operas in English. Because in a foreign language, you have super titles. subtitles hung above the stage, and the level of the singing in relation to the live orchestra can be much less because you get the context of things from the written supertitles. Whereas if they're singing in English, the actual singing needs to be louder so you can understand what's going on. So that idea of like getting your information from some other cue, whether it be written or a visual cue, allows you to hear things differently. Absolutely.
Go, Jeff.
It's such a weird thing when I'm editing even my own voice for recording voiceover. It's amazing sometimes if I, want to really kind of critically listen. Was there a click just there for whatever reason? I hit play, close my eyes, and then I can really focus on it. And I don't know if it's just because I'm not distracted by looking at what's happening on screen, but I do that all the time.
Yeah, if I really like an audio mixer, I think, someone did something really good. A lot of times I'll sit there on a Saturday afternoon and I will literally just close my eyes and listen to a movie, the whole movie. Like I just lay back and I just listen to it and I listen to what they're doing and I listen. And it's very hard, as Jeff said, for me to watch the movie and listen to it. It's very hard, but I can listen to the whole movie and just hear it. And sometimes I'll be walking around doing yard work and I just put the movie on and I just listen to it on my phone, and I'm just listening to it while I'm working and thinking about, oh, I see what they did there, and that's really cool. And I can get it at a whole different level than I can if I'm trying to watch it. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I do a similar sort of thing when I'm audio editing with a client. When we go to listen back to an edit, I set every computer I use, the bottom left-hand corner, if you roll the mouse into it, it turns on the screensaver. So when I go hit play and I just roll the mouse down there and the screensaver activates, so you're not looking at waveforms going by. Yeah. And it allows you to actually listen rather than listen with your eye.
Yeah, especially if I do any kind of edit, like an edit to a vocal or something like that, the first thing I do is hit play and I close my eyes to make sure that I don't notice that it went from one thing to the next, or I don't hear it's too hard to do it without it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, Waves has a dedicated compression plugin called Spherix, which is designed for 7.1.4 or 7.1.2 mixing. Not having surround mixing experience, would it be advantageous? And he's got a link there to the Waves plugin.
It could be. I mean, as we start to move forward with a lot of this, we'll start to experiment with a lot more of these plugins and so on and so forth. So we'll have to take a look at it. Next question.
Jeff Cohen, Miami Beach, Florida. How does listening with headphones affect our perception of surround sound? Given in the real world, both ears hear all sound just with the difference in timing, but with headphones, the channels are isolated to each ear depending on the mix.
Go ahead, Jeff.
And I think I want to give credit. I think Jeff Francis actually just kind of mentioned this in his talk the other week. And it sounds so simple and obvious, but it really made me think about that because it's true. It's a distinct difference. And like Alex was just talking about, and that's really my question. I mean, are you mixing with any of those scenarios in mind that someone's going to be in a theater versus how they might perceive it in headphones?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
So if there is a thing that can happen with surround mixes, that they can be rendered into binaural. And so basically what happens is each speaker signal is given that head-related transfer function. So a right side speaker would arrive with its signal playing out of my right headphone sooner than my left headphone. And it would have head shadowing and pin cues and all of that applied to it. And that's part of the binaural render.
Yeah, what's interesting is it can be binaural or it can just be straight on stereo. And what happens is that whole surround mix gets folded down into a stereo mix. And a lot of times from Atmos, it'll get folded down into that. Now, we've interviewed a lot of mixing, and there's a little bit of controversy as to whether you should do a separate mix, a surround mix. What Dolby pushes and a fair number of mixers agree with is that if you just build the whole thing in Atmos, the fold down to stereo will actually be superior than if you actually try to mix it on your own for stereo and mix it for, they're mostly saying start at Atmos and then go down to stereo. There's a lot of different opinions in that area as to which one is better. I've heard a lot of Atmos fold downs that have sounded great. But I think that they both sound really good. If you have someone, it's mostly like how talented is your audio engineer, and hopefully they're very talented, because then they will a talented audio engineer will you generally build a better stereo mix, in my opinion. But an average audio engineer will not be able to do better than Atmos. So next question.
Jeff Francis back again from Columbia. What are the panel's thoughts on dedicated surround microphones?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm just kind of curious. There's a whole bunch of these things. There's, these kind of, so that's the
go ahead.
The holophone and the DPA, the DPA is the one at the bottom that looks like, they call it the bicycle seat microphone. And these have 5 Omni transducers mounted on the outside of a body. And then that's the new Audio-Technica, which has 8, I believe, cardioid capsules pointing in all kinds of wacky directions. And then there's things like the Ambio. Mike, I think I have a picture of that.
I have the Ambio, and we're going to be testing that I'm actually testing it this weekend. I thought it would be last weekend, but I'm going to try to do it there. And then Zoom has one as well. And so we're going to start testing some of those as we move forward. Again, this is something that we're going to talk about. A lot of times we're using mics that aren't surround, that are just giving us the stuff we want to put in the surround speakers. So that might be audience. It might be something else that we're trying to do, that or reverb, and we're not capturing it as a capsule. One of the complaints about the capsule is that it doesn't separate very much, so that they're not the HRTF isn't there. There are actually mics that you can get. Sennheiser actually makes ambio mics that you can put in as headphones, and they're microphones. They record using your head actually as the blocker, for them. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at this. Again, as we do more and more in 5.1 on the show, you'll see us experimenting with a lot of these mics. Go ahead, Marty.
When you take individual microphones and put them together in arrays, there's a lot of physics that go into that, because as sound arrives to these microphones, they will record at different times and at different intensities, depending on whether it's a cardioid microphone, an omnidirectional microphone, and the relationship. And so, dating back to the early days of just recording stereo, there are different ways that you can put different microphones together in different arrays, meaning how far apart they are, what angle they are in relation to each other. And so these combination microphones, these one-piece microphones, try and make it very simple to do that, because all of that physics is already done for you.
Yeah. Next question.
Next question comes up from John Preto in Las Vegas. How does Dolby Atmos ensure that audio objects are accurately positioned in a 3-dimensional space within the listening environment?
Go ahead, John.
I just wanted to wish Chad LFG happy birthday. That's all.
Very good. Go ahead, Jeff.
They do the best they can. So they use the speaker or speakers that is closest to the position that the object, its 3-dimensional position of the object. And it determines, your playback system determines this is the closest speaker or the closest pair of speakers, and we'll do a phantom image between those closest pair of speakers. The more speakers you have, the more accurate it is.
There we go. I think that was a good introduction. Like just a casual conversation about this. We're going to have this. Hopefully, gets people thinking about it and interested in it. That's all the design was for today. Was just to talk through that. We are going to do a lot more around this. I do want us to kind of become a think tank for doing immersive audio. And so the goal is to bring more people in as often as once a month to talk about immersive audio and really have us by the end of the year really get it and really understand it. And we're going to work on how do we get you some example files and how do we do labs in Atmos, and how do we do, bits and pieces of how to make this all work so that we have a large number of people. Because what happens, and it's why we have like a graphics day, we're trying to kind of build that up in our group, is that as more and more of us understand it, even the basic understanding, it accelerates all of our learning, because more and more of us are starting to think about it as a group. I know that sounds like a crazy way to do this, but we're not trying to have one person figure this out and tell us. We're trying to have 50 or 100 of us thinking about it and researching on our own. And every time we have these conversations, the conversation will get deeper and more pointed every single time. And that's our goal. So my recommendation is to keep on studying this, take the things that we've talked about here, go out and study those things. We're going to have some pretty deep thinkers when it comes to this coming on the show. And you want to, learn as much as you can to get the most out of their joining us. Go ahead, Jeff.
I just want to, I found this picture. It wasn't the one I was looking for. This is a research facility in China, and there's 200 Genelec speakers in a sphere.
I need that, and then just put a screen in there, and I can just watch.
Wow,
that's what you're seeing there is a picture of my future movie space. That's where I want to watch when I watch my films.
When Alex has $1 billion,
exactly.
That'll be it.
Maybe even just 100,000, and then I won't have any more money. So anyway, I'll just have that probably not even a couple $100,000, and I won't have any more money, but I'll have a great theater experience. All right, thanks so much to the producers. Great questions to keep everything going. It was good conversation, and that's thanks to the producers for keeping that going. Thanks to the panelists, of course. We can't do this without you. Really great conversation. This is exactly what we wanted to do on this first one. So great work there. And of course, thanks to the incredible team on the back end that allows us to have this happen. This show doesn't happen without a small village that gets up every day, meets between all of these, meets over the week, figures out how to make things better, how to make things more stable. There's just an enormous. We had we have a dev team meeting on Tuesdays, and I'm always struck by just the enormous amount of work people are putting into making this a great show. So we just really appreciate all the work that everybody does to have this actually happen. So thanks for your contribution. And we have traveled 103,000 miles. So we made it to 1K, 165,000 kilometers. That's 933 million bananas for scale.
Or
and,
half a Tlaloc.
Half a what's a Tlaloc?
I'd say 250,000 miles. Yeah,
250,000 miles, almost half a Tlaloc. Okay, so 250,000 miles is a Tlaloc. Okay, all right. Okay, now we have a new point of reference. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. There'll be somewhere in the future where when we whisper, it'll be all around you. Like you'll hear Jeff Cohen coming in from the surround speaker, and then you'll hear somebody else.
Terrifying.
It'll just be like this. In fact, it'll probably be all just regular stereo for most of the show, and then suddenly you'll just hear this.
Earn your way to the overhead channels. Rise up. Rise up. Big man.
We'll just increase the bass real slow.
Oh, he's in the upper left channel. I see him.
Oh, no, I'm in the subwoofer again.
Halloween target. Halloween.
If you don't shape up, I'm putting you in the subwoofer. You'll spend the whole show.
I think Nigel will come from the subwoofer.
Oh, time out in the subwoofer. Oh.
What's that
they're
sound?
meeting to the back of the bus.
Yeah, exactly.
That'll teach me to interrupt